So Sophia talked about my bio a little bit, but I want to bring out a couple key points of my work. So I've been doing college counseling for over 10 years, and I worked at Princeton Admissions for a while as a reader. I work with my father, Don B., who you see in some of the IvyCompass materials, who's also a college counselor. And I myself was a recruited athlete a very long time ago. I was recruited to play Division I field hockey at Duke. That's where I met my husband, was also a recruited athlete. He was a D1 wrestler, and went on to, he's actually a wrestling coach and athletic director. And then we have two children, and my daughter was a recruited, actually she, which I didn't have on the slides, is a double recruit. She was recruited first to play soccer at Williams College, where she went on in her first year to win an NCAA championship, which is a huge accomplishment. It's a D3 school. We'll get into that. She was also recruited to run track. My son, who went to Reed College and graduated last May, does not care about sports at all. So we have a very sporty child and one who doesn't care about sports at all. So if anyone can relate to that experience with very different children, that's helpful. As I mentioned, I went to Duke, I went to Rutgers and got an MBA after college, but have a lot of experience with the world of college athletics and the recruitment process. I'll just pause, Sophia. If you want to pop in at any time, let me know. Okay, so let's go big picture. The thing to know is that the NCAA is the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and that is the organization that runs all collegiate sports programs. So they have oversee 1,000 schools. Those schools are all broken into conferences to compete against one another in small groups. And it's nearly 500,000 student athletes. There's more to the NCAA than the NCAA basketball tournament, which most people know about, also called March Madness. The NCAA is the rule enforcement agency of college sports, and that actually becomes part of the recruitment process. So there are rules and regulations to recruiting athletes. And so they also oversee all of the structure of the conferences, the structure of all of the tournaments that happen within the school, and they oversee the recruitment process and the academic policies and practices of individual schools related to what athletes they're able to recruit and bring into their university. So when you have a student who is being recruited, you may engage with the NCAA depending on the level that they are being recruited. And there's information on the NCAA website, and we'll talk a little bit more about that connection. And the most important part about this when it comes to your student athlete is that the NCAA is divided into three divisions. So D1, Duke, that I mentioned, and these larger universities with huge, big sports programs are all D1. So there are about 350 colleges. They have very large budgets. Your state university is a D1 school wherever you are across the United States. These are for the most part, elite level athletes. They are both recruited athletes, and they are given what we used to say as of a couple years ago, they could receive scholarships for attending a university, sometimes a partial scholarship that covered a couple $1,000s of tuition, all the way up to full scholarships, meaning the student does not pay for their tuition, maybe they pay their room and board. That has all changed under the NIL, new policies and practices of the NCAA, which is name, image, and likeness. I don't know, we're getting kind of into the details of this, but that has changed the game. It is the policies that the NCAA has adopted because student athletes felt like they were not getting a share of the revenue that the colleges were making off the athletes' name, image, and likeness. So now we see at the elite level of college sports, students who are coming to the recruitment process with a brand, often through social media, or are particularly, known in their sport and highly coveted and looked after and sought after in the recruitment process. They're actually being paid to attend the college, not just even a scholarship, but kind of a salary. And they're also taking a percent of the revenue of the college sports that are happening. We can talk about that later in more detail. D1 also requires more eligibility as a student, and I'll also get into that. So then we've got D2. You don't hear about D2 very much, and it's because most of the colleges that are D2 colleges are regional schools that, I'll be honest, for the most part, most students that I engage with that come to me through IvyCompass, that are all of you, are looking for a more selective university than what a D2 school has to offer. So a D2 school, I'm trying to even think of any of them, they would not be on the radar of many of us on this call, of me in my counseling service, but a place like Hofstra, a regional university on Long Island, for example, with a lot of commuting students. And then lastly, but really what we're going to talk more about today is D3. So the Division 3 of the NCAA is about 438 schools. It's the largest because they don't offer athletic scholarships, but their eligibility, this is where the college application process comes in. D3 is kind of the place where a really successful student athlete can be recruited to a D3 school, a very high quality university, and actually be admitted to that school even if their academic and personal credentials are slightly less than what the school would admit if the student weren't an athlete. And so we're going to talk more about D3 schools in this presentation because it's where the college recruitment process and where many of our students are going to line up in terms of their athleticism and their ability to attend a D3 school. But I can still answer questions about all three of the divisions. So that's what we're looking at. Those are the divisions of the NCAA. And these are kind of important. And as you get into more athletics, you'll hear D1 and D3 a lot. And D2 may come up, but it's often, again, just not a level of school, a selectivity level that many parents are striving for. So the athletic landscape is an interesting one. So around 7% of high school athletes go on to play sports in college. That's 1 in 13. Less than 2%, 1 in 57 of high school athletes go on to play Division I sports. So Division I is this sort of promised land for some students, but many of the students that I work with want to play sports in college in one way or another and are kind of happy to use the sports to get into the most competitive college that they are able to. So that leads us to a little bit more data on D3. So there are about 202,000 athletes in the 425-ish D3 schools. 80% of these athletes receive non-athletic financial aid, and mostly because schools that we're talking about here are $80,000 or $90,000 a year. These schools can be very high quality institutions. And so they average about 19 teams per school. So 1 in 5 students at a small liberal arts college, for example, like Williams College, where my daughter attended, they're athletes. So there's probably, I think Williams housed 23 different sports. And so because they're only a 2,000 student college, then 30%-ish of their student body actually has to play sports just in order to field that many teams. So when we'll get into this in a little more detail, but we're talking about really those colleges prioritizing athletes because it's very important to them to have a strong athletic department and have their teams succeed. There is, national championships, as I mentioned, in D3 universities. There are in D1 and there are in D2 and D3. And so it's a big point of pride for many universities to celebrate their national championships or when their teams go on through the NCAA tournament and do well. So college campuses are definitely academically driven, but many of the D3 campuses are really putting a lot of time and energy and effort and resources into athletics, which starts with the recruitment process, moves into the admissions process, then moves into investments in the school's facilities and all of the budget that goes to support their teams and have them go on to achieve these championships. So some of the most competitive D3 schools are listed on this slide. And so we're talking about what's so interesting to me about the D3 athletic landscape is that what you see, and I'll walk through some of these, is that the most competitive D3 colleges academically are also producing, by and large, the most competitive sports teams. So you think, you have a great student athlete who is a swimmer or a soccer player, whatever it ends up being, and families get really excited because they think, oh, this is excellent. My student is a great academically and a very good at their sport. Maybe this means that they can be going to a Johns Hopkins or an MIT or a Chicago. What we see actually is that the students often can make the cut academically, but they are in fact not good enough to be recruited because Johns Hopkins or MIT or Chicago, they are at a place where they are winning these national championships across multiple sports. So these schools, not all of them, but many of them are actually competing at the highest levels of their D3 conferences. So the most selective list, we have Johns Hopkins. These aren't, by the way, in any order based on sport or anything, but they are generally in a top to bottom order of selectivity. So we've got Johns Hopkins, MIT, Chicago, NYU, Carnegie Mellon, Williams, Emory, Haverford, Pomona, Bowdoin, Middlebury, Tufts, and Amherst. Okay, so those are the most selective schools, and I'll talk about my process later. That's my list of the most selective schools that are also D3 schools that are offering this bump, this advantage to the recruited athlete. We have the next level selective schools. It's a little bit of a step down from these most selectives, but still very competitive and difficult to get into. We've got Hamilton, Vassar, Babson, Wesleyan, Denison, Carleton, Pitzer, McAllister. And then lastly, we've got the competitive group, which are a couple other D3 schools, Bates, Kenyon, Occidental, Stevens Institute of Technology, and a place like Gettysburg. So what we see here, and let me say one note about this, is that almost always a D3 school, all of the sports in that school, in that college, are D3, but there are exceptions. If a school has a sport that can compete at the D1 level, then sometimes one sport will be a D1 sport. So for example, at Williams, I'll mention Williams a lot because I'm so familiar with it. At Williams, the downhill skiing team is D1 and everything else is D3. So sometimes you find these little anomalies in these schools depending on what they look like. But that's generally, these are all D3, all offering D3 recruitment opportunities. So I'm sure you're wondering, where are the Ivy Leagues on this list? And here's a bit of trivia for everybody on this call. The Ivy League, so going back here, let me just go back here for 1 second. On this list of colleges, so as I mentioned with the NCAA, all of the colleges in the country that are part of the NCAA are divided up into leagues and conferences. So they all have a group of schools that they come together and those schools work together to figure out what their philosophy around student athletes are. That conference or league plays sports against each other primarily. So they have, like, say it's 9, 10, 12 schools in a league, and that's how the country is divided up sports wise. So when you go to college and you play on a sports team, your rivals, your top rivals, are the other colleges that are in your conference. That then you play a couple schools that are out of your conference in other conferences. And then only when you get to win your own conference do you get to go on to the NCAA tournament, in which you then see and meet up with the better schools that have won their conferences. So I just want to show you on this slide that one of the most prolifically good conferences that has the best D3 sports and the most selective colleges is called the NESCAC. It's the Northeast Small College Conference, and it includes Williams, Bowdoin, Middlebury, Tufts, Amherst, Hamilton, Wesleyan, Bates. I think that's all of them. So within this most selective to competitive list here, we have, and there are a couple other conferences represented here as well, but the NESCAC, that includes those schools that I mentioned, that is just one conference. And so those schools all come together, all their athletic directors come together, and they discuss, what is our student athlete experience going to be? Let's all share the same values around our sports. Let's all recruit in a similar fashion. Let's all be part of the same conference with same rules and regulations, with the same amount of preseason, with the same amount of spring games, all of that kind of stuff. And so what you see, and the NESCAC happens to be one of them, is just an extreme level of both success academically in these highly selective schools and athletically. And that's across all the sports. Okay, so we know there's the NESCAC League, the NESCAC conference in the Northeast of the United States. There's another athletic conference in the United States, and it is the Ivy League. So when you hear the term Ivy League, this is an athletic conference. So a lot of folks think that an Ivy League school is a measure of a quality of a certain type of school. But in fact, and it is used that way in sort of our language, everybody's like, oh, that's an Ivy League, but it's not. The Ivy League is an athletic conference just like the NESCAC, the ACC, the Big Ten, all of these conferences. If you ever watch, sports on TV, you see all of these conferences. And so the Ivy League is a conference of 8 member schools, which are Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Penn, Dartmouth, Brown, and Cornell. The Ivy League is the athletic league that binds these schools together. So if you go to Harvard, you're going to play all of these 7 teams probably twice in an athletic season. They're going to be your biggest rivals. And then at the end of your season, you're going to play in an Ivy League tournament against all of these. And the winner of the Ivy League, because it's a D1 conference, but it's a D1 light, because they have such a high academic index, which I'll talk about in a second, that you have to actually win the Ivies in order to go on to the NCAA tournament. And only usually one Ivy League school is able to do that. So a couple years ago, Princeton had a very good basketball team, would win the Ivy championship, and then would go into the NCAA tournament for men's basketball or women's basketball. And then sometimes they do well. Usually they lose in the first couple of rounds. So the Ivy League has the most strict academic index. That means that when a student is being considered as a recruit to come to an Ivy League college, their SAT scores and their GPA, and probably some other indicators are considered in advance of that recruitment. And the coaches have to spend time getting to know their recruited athletes and getting to know their academic records so that together they can pool their athletes, go to the admissions office and say, if I put all of these 6 or 10 athletes on my list, I'm the coach, here are their academics, and they're all good enough that we can be sure that we're making the index. So it's an average of all of the students' credentials together as a team that make this academic index. Couple interesting facts about this process. I have a nephew who attended Princeton, and his freshman year roommate was, like a 6'10", 6'10" basketball player who was recruited to the men's basketball team. He had a perfect SAT score and a perfect GPA. And he was on the team, but he never played in any games. And what he knew, because the coaches told him, was that he was recruited as a practice player, but mainly he was recruited to help the academic index of the basketball team so that they could put together an index that would meet the criteria of the admissions office and let in some athletes, some basketball players who did not have as strong an academic profile. I knew a young woman who was recruited to play soccer at Princeton, and when she was in the recruitment process, her coaches at Princeton, her prospective coaches, told her to take the SAT 5 times. And they asked that she continually take it in order to get better and better scores to help the academic index and allow for them to recruit students who had less of a high academic profile. So this academic index exists for every conference across the country that your athlete would potentially go to. In the D1 zone, it's much more strict, and the NCAA is involved in that and actually has a basement level for SAT scores. In D3 schools, the conferences figure out what that academic index is, and it's much more figured out at the school level without the NCAA involved. So that's an extra level of information that, just so you know, that's basically what some of the recruiting process involves, which we'll talk about again later. But just know that the Ivy League, you can still talk about these schools as Ivies, but truly now you know that the actual Ivy League is an athletic conference. That's how it all started. I am from New Jersey, by the way, and I will share that much to the sadness of Rutgers University, they were invited to join the Ivy League, 100 years ago and declined. And I think probably have regretted that ever since. So that's their infamous story about the Ivy League and Rutgers University. So let's talk about why a recruited athlete process is so important. One, it's great for a student to feel wanted by a college. So the student gets recruited, goes to the school knowing they are part of a team, continuing their work as an athlete, right? When they get there, it's pretty intense, it's great. But one thing that is not known as well by non-Native American, Native English folks who went through the collegiate system and were athletes is that the fix is really in for recruited athletes. Not 100% of the time, but generally speaking, the conversation around admissions is about legacy, right? Is legacy, so first it was, about well, anyway, let's just talk about legacy. So it's okay, does a student get a bump if a family member attended this university? And for some schools have gone away from that and they're not looking at legacy as much, and some truly are and continue to uphold legacy. So the general population thinks legacy is the big fix, is the big, that's the bonus. That's what you can get. That's your little bump in order to be admitted. But the reality is that being a recruited athlete is the key. And the reason it's key is two reasons. One, because you do get a bump. You do get as long as you're generally meeting the index, right? You're able to be recruited, go onto a coach's list. That coach has an admissions officer dedicated to athletes. They're in a conversation, and the coach is advocating for your student athlete to be admitted. Unless there are red flags and issues, it is very likely that student will be admitted if that whole pipeline works right. The second reason being a recruited athlete is a really interesting prospect is because of what happens in junior year and onward. So there are many industries in the United States. The top two I can speak to with a lot of certainty at Williams and Amherst and other places. The top two are consulting and finance. And what you see happen is a pipeline. So imagine a student athlete is now working for a consulting firm in Boston, right? Williams is in Massachusetts. And so there's these big consulting and finance firms and private equity firms in the Boston area. Those former athletes are coming back to visit. They're going to their sports teams. They're rooting for their, former baseball player comes back and roots for his baseball team. They're meeting the students. Those students know that that former athlete is at a private equity firm in Boston, and that person is recruiting those athletes to come to their firm for their summer internship after junior year. And then miraculously, those student athletes are being hired. So what you see is that depending on the region of the country and the industries there, we do see a pipeline from the D3 high performing D3 colleges into careers because of this alumni pipeline. And it's even more strong when it's an athletically related alumni pipeline. So sort of anecdotally, we just see tons of students going into these careers. They can go into any career they want, right? If they're in computer science, they can go do that. And there probably are alumni from those places and helping them out. But this athletic pipeline really is strong in some careers, in some firms related to some of these D3 colleges and Ivy League schools as well. So you can see my little Williams College pipeline, recruited athlete to college athlete to intern to getting your finance or consulting job upon graduation. And so that's a pretty, these students have to be really good as students in their college. They have to do really well in their internships, but you do definitely see these pipelines are in place. Okay, so here's what everybody wants to know is, can my athlete be recruited, right? So the first criteria is basically, like for you, if you're curious, and I saw the chat went away, so I can't see that anymore, I apologize. But basically, you as a parent can do some work around this of figuring a lot of this out, especially if what I call your students in what I would call an objective sport, meaning that there is data from your athlete to compare to colleges and the data on their athletes. So track and cross country, timed. It doesn't matter if they're smiling when they run or running funny or doing anything. The time matters. Swimming, just the time matters. Golf, the score matters, or the average score. And rowing is another one, where there's just an erg machine and a rower, and you have to get a great time on your erg, and then you are all of a sudden possibly in the recruited athlete zone. Okay, so track any sports with objectivity, an objective piece of data that you can compare to a college's athletic team. You can do the math on that, right? And you can know, is my student in this range? So I'm working right now with a golfer who is like 2 points away on his, his golf score. he's D3 right now. If he shaves off about two, he's like a 74. If he can get down to the low 70s, he could open the door to being a D1 potential recruited athlete. So he's just got this number in mind that he's working toward. And that makes the recruitment process really easy because you can check to see what colleges have what type of range of scores, and you can kind of do the math. I see you coming off camera, Sophia. Do you want me to pause?
Yeah, just one quick question. I think a lot of Chinese family are playing tennis. So I see on Dropbox family parents asking, is tennis are objective or subjective? I
So
want
a
to answer
lot
that
of them
question
are
before
kind
we
of a,
move on.
right. A lot of them are a bit of a combination because there's always scores and there's always data in all sports. So, for example, baseball and softball, tennis, you've got all the scores, you've got, kind of all of that, the statistics related to your student's sport, and some more than others. But the answer is if there is a subjective decision by a coach involved in a sport, then the answer is it is subjective. And tennis would be a subjective. Well, yes, and so again, there's levels. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So, generally speaking, subjective is there's a position on the field that your student may be playing, and a lot of coaches are rearranging that student's position when they're considering them for a recruit. So, what you hear a lot in field sports like soccer or field hockey or lacrosse is, oh, your student in high school is a center forward. If your student is a center forward, meaning they score all the goals, whatever, they're likely going to be a defender when they get recruited because that's just how this works. And only the super elite center forwards stay in that position. So that's an example of your student may have a lot of data around the number of goals they've scored, assists they've scored, trophies won, all of that stuff. It's still subjective because the coach is putting together a team on a field, whether that's baseball, softball, positioning and decision making is involved. I'll share that for something like tennis, it can be less subjective because if a student is playing tennis and has moved outside of the school zone into competitive tennis and is actually, there's a ranking system in tennis, right? So if you are top in your state, then you're going to start to understand where this student is in terms of the recruitment process. So tennis is a little bit of a combo between subjective and objective. Golf is also that way. It is a number, and there's also a statewide rating system. So when it's a student who is an individual in their sport, there can be, more of that state competition level. So, for example, in New Jersey, the state wrestling championships were today. Those wrestlers who won state are by and large D1 recruits, and they're going to be all recruited to D1 schools. But that also has levels itself. So that's the other thing too, that what I have is the ability to help figure out where the student is in all of this, and know what those indicators are, and then better understand that, and then be able to support the process. So first of all, do you have data that helps you better understand where your student sits in this leveling? And I'll just pause on this one because I can tell you, having been a parent of a recruited athlete, are they committed and passionate? So being a recruited athlete is not like studying for the SAT where they have to grind it out and like do well and really be committed and then they earn this score. They need to definitely be committed to, eager to attend. So these are sort of, as a parent, what you're looking for. Is my student eager to attend practice? Is the student leading the effort? So in my home, my daughter was like, let's go, we're going to be late. And we weren't telling her to get ready for practice. She was telling us to get in the car and drive her there. She was hungry for additional training and practice, and striving and happy to want higher levels of competitiveness. She also did not feel, and this may be your athlete, she did not feel pushed and pulled socially. She wanted to be playing this sport and she was willing to sacrifice a lot of things of a traditional high schooler in order to achieve at her sport at the highest level. And then the student has to have a maturity level and an engagement because the recruitment process takes work, right? They have to want to proactively communicate and be willing to connect with coaches. They need to be able to attend camps, ID clinics, and go on visits. And then they also have to like navigate this recruitment process, which has ups and downs. It is not all just like the best thing ever. It really is an emotional roller coaster. There are ups and downs, there are disappointments, and sometimes I'll be honest, it just doesn't work out. So that's a big criteria for families. And then the question is, are they playing at the top level? So students who are recruited are, depending on the sport, either playing at the top level of their school. So their school is really, winning things, or they are winning things for their school. And also, what we've seen is many sports have moved into the better and more competitive version of that sport is happening outside of school in a club environment. So you see everything from wrestling to volleyball to soccer, mostly, right? Soccer is all of this club play that is all over the place. Some sports, it doesn't matter. You don't need to play club. You don't need to run track for a club, but you can if you want. And football, there is club football, but high school is still winning the football game. So being in a high school football team is still where the recruitment happens, not in the club. So is the student on a team or competing at the top level year round, traveling either in their own state, regionally, nationally, or internationally? And are these levels of state, region, national, international, is it pay to play? Like, oh, my team got invited to go to tour Europe and play. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about doing competitions that one leads to the next, to the next, to the next, because the student and the team is achieving. Usually we see students showing a lot of promise in 9th and 10th grade, and then starting to really level up in 11th grade. And then, like I'm saying, there's objective data for if you have objective data and can do a comparison to a college around 11th grade is when the beginning of 11th grade, if you don't know sooner, is the time when you start to turn your attention to, can this athlete be recruited? And sometimes it's surprising and, oh my God, I didn't realize that my student was achieving at this level. And other times it's, my student has put in so much time and energy, so much love for this sport, but they just are not making the criteria. So we don't have enough time to go into every sport, but know that this leveling process is out there, and that there are a lot of indicators for each sport to figure out what this is. And I will also share, there are a lot of services out there that will try to, there's websites, there are companies that are trying to get you to pay them to get your athlete recruited. And almost always the work of doing this with me or another college counselor is more beneficial than using those recruitment sites. So there's a lot of people trying to make money off of this. There are a lot of sites out there. Generally speaking, if your athlete is in a club sport, that club is being measured by how many students get recruited. And so they're working to get your student recruited as well. And so they're measured on that. So they're for real trying to move that forward. They may use one of these services for your student to put a profile page out there that's accessible by coaches. That's okay. But there are a lot of other companies that you just want to be a little bit cautious around because they're just trying to get money out there and claim that they have access to a lot of coaches. So just pausing for a second, I downloaded a lot of information, but I just want to share with you when I work with students, a big part of my work is this rating system. And so I academically rate my students across these academic categories, right? And so by doing this and having all of this criteria, I can say, where the student falls. And then there's also a personal rating that I use to measure my students. And so this becomes how we look at all of and I heard Sophia mention them in her introduction, all the extracurricular activities, service, leadership, everything you hear about for your student, right? What clubs and activities are they in? Are they volunteering? Are they doing research? Like what's going on with them? And here, this red annoying circle is circling the talent column. And that's where your recruited athlete talent goes. So when I rate students, I do it academically, and I also do it across this rubric. And we really spend some time figuring out what a sport achievement looks like here in this talent pool. And so what sometimes happens, and this is a question that the folks at IvyCompass asked me to address, is what happens when you have a student who's devoted to their sport, but we decide that their level of talent is kind of very good, and they're probably not a recruited athlete. When do you make the decision for them to either stop playing that sport and focus on other things, or set the expectation that they can continue to play that sport, but it's not going to result in a recruited athlete experience, right? And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit as well. But generally speaking, being a recruited athlete does not make any of these categories go away. So all of the students that I worked with who were recruited successfully to schools had this talent. They had their academic level, which might have been a little bit under, but the talent wasn't the only thing on their list. They still, even though they were so busy at their sport, they were involved in clubs and activities. They were doing service when they could. They were, being good students and getting good personal characteristics in their letters of recommendation. So it wasn't permission. Being a good athlete is not a permission or a recruited athlete to do nothing else. You still need to be a very good student academically. You still need to be working on your personal side. And I will share, I had one student who did not do much else, and the recruiting process kind of collapsed because he was overly confident about his abilities as an athlete, and he thought he was much more talented. I actually had two athletes, one swimmer, one soccer player, both boys, not saying anything about that, and they both despite my attempts and their families' attempts to take their expectation level down, they thought their athletic achievement was really at the top of the game. And in fact, it was not, according to coaches. And then they let some of these categories drop away despite advice. And, they ended up in a different, one person ended up in a bad situation, did not get into schools that they wanted to be in. And another person ended up going to a school that's a great school, but they sure thought they were going to go somewhere else. So it's important in the counseling process to know that the athletic recruitment is really important, but still the student has to have a strong profile to be admitted to these schools. So when I support my students who are athletes, so this over here on the right is kind of my usual. I do all of the support and counseling of a regular student, and then I add recruitment support. So that involves, we might create an entirely second college list that would be a list if the student was recruited, or integrating colleges where the student is actively being recruited from into the college list. Usually when it's a student who's being recruited, we run two systems at the same time. One, okay, here's the schools that are interested in you, that you're interested in. Here are schools that are on a list, whether you're, even if you're not being recruited, here's your list. And sometimes those are a little bit different. But my strategy is to play it safe. I want the recruitment to happen. I want it all to work out, but I want that student, if it falls apart, to have options of the best possible schools they can be admitted to without the athletics. So we do a lot of discussion about list development. We talk about communication plans and strategies. So how is the student proactively reaching out to colleges, to coaches on the list that we're putting together? Keeping communication going is a big challenge, right? So how often and what is being said to the college coach. We usually put an Excel spreadsheet together and check in on that and make sure communication is happening. I give advice on a recruitment visit if the student is invited by the coach to come to the college campus. I do draft emails and texts to help with that process. And we go through the process, and with my support. So this is a big timeline here. This is my usual timeline, grades 9, 10, 11, the summer before senior year and senior year. This is a lot of information. But down here at the bottom is where the recruitment process happens. So let's talk a little bit about that. And then I think we're getting to the question part. So in grades 9 and 10, your student should be playing, oh, sorry, that keeps happening. Hold on. Playing at the top level for their age. And attending camps and clinics. So summer after 9th grade would be attending a college level sports camp if that's offered for your sport. And then any types of clinics and additional opportunities to be better at that sport, right? So unique teams that are forming where the student can join, different clinics put on by really good coaches, all that stuff. You're working in 9th and 10th grade to just get that student playing at the top level. Some students, as they age into 10th, going into 11th, are working with personal trainers, fitness coaches, speed and agility coaches, and doing kind of whatever they can to be better and better at their sport. So by grade 11, you want the student playing certainly at the top level possible and be having a college list put together, because the recruitment process for college, especially D3, well, both D1 and D3, really happens by June of grade 11. So you really want to be on coaches' radars, in conversations with them, outreach to them, and then attending any additional ID clinics and visits. The general, and I probably should have started with this, especially for D3, the perception of athletes is that a coach will see them play, will reach out to them, and will recruit them. When in fact, the reality is most of the time, the student is self-recruiting themselves to a school. So for example, students that I helped recruit, my daughter, for one, attended an ID clinic at Williams College in 10th grade spring. And then they said, can you come back in 11th grade? So we went back there, had another conversation, and they started to show much more interest in her as an 11th grader. Then she was invited to a recruitment visit where she attended with other recruits, watched a game, was wooed by them, and then by spring of 11th grade, around June, she was submitting pre-read materials. So once the very end of the school year comes, you are narrowing things down, hopefully, to a school, especially if it's D3, where that coach is wanting you on their list to hand to the admissions office, and they're doing a pre-read. And that is when the student submits SAT scores and GPA and any AP, whatever the school's curriculum offers, to the coach. And then the coach is packaging that up and bringing it to the admissions officer in charge of athletes and saying, here is the class of 5, 10, depending on the sport, 3 athletes that I want to recruit for this school. If the admissions officer signs off and says, okay, Then the coach will ask your student to apply early decision to that school if it's offered by that school. And the student submits the application by the due date, and by December 15th, they get the yes, and that's the end of the process. The student gets into their dream school as a recruited athlete and then goes off to college the following fall to play their sport. Throughout senior year, though, we want to be always in ongoing communication with the coach. We submit the application, as I mentioned, usually on November 1st. You're admitted by December 15th. But again, always staying in communication with the coach or other teammates throughout the spring so that everything's lined up for when they're ready to go in the fall. So here are some questions that IvyCompass put to me that I'm happy to answer. Sophia, feel free to pop in. That was kind of the end of my formal, presentation. So if you see questions in the chat that I can answer, I'm happy to do that, whatever way you want to move forward.
Is this question you want to go ahead and answer that, or you
Sure.
wanted to? Yeah,
Sure, I can do
let's
that.
do that.
So one question, when should a student continue pursuing athletic recruitment, and when is it time to pivot to a different admission strategy? That's a really good question. So that gets to the question of like, is it worth it for my student to play a sport if they're not recruited? I would say for one kind of generational issue, right? For maybe Chinese versus American students, the act of playing a sport in high school to an admissions officer is very important. So whether your student is being recruited or not, being part of an athletic team is seen as a very good part of a application profile. So they don't have to be an amazing athlete, but they're committing to a team. They're learning teamwork. They're having, fun and doing things with their classmates. They win, they lose. There's so much highly respected experience that comes from being part of a team. That's the value system in the United States. So if you're worried about your student being an athlete on a team, one sport, two seasons of the school year, three of the school year, know that their pursuit of athletics, whether that results in recruitment or not, is very valuable. So if your student is an athlete, enjoys doing a sport, I would say at a minimum, have that student play at least one athletic season per year of high school. JV is fine, and then eventually, hopefully, they'll become varsity. But there's a very common question on almost every college application, which is tell us about a community that you are involved with. And whether the student achieved themselves on that team or not, that is a great answer to the question about community. I was part of this team. I sat the bench. I was not good, but I love this group of people. I worked hard. I supported them. I'm really good at other things, but I struggled, and that struggle paid off, and I have great friendships with these people, etc. There's a million ways you can answer that question on a college application. So I would say this, your student is a 9th or a 10th grader. If they are super busy playing a sport, I'd say at the end of 10th grade, you all should have an evaluation of, okay, how much time is, and I'm talking, for example, a swimmer. So swimming is a hugely time consuming, especially if there's a school sport plus a club, and it's exhausting and it's really hard. So if that student is doing both school and club and swimming kind of year round, at the end of 10th grade, say, let's have a conversation about whether we should do this, continue to do this. If the student's like, whew, I'm exhausted, I'm okay to do less of this, stick with the school and forget the club, because the connection to the school is very important. Again, community, you've got a coach who could be writing an optional letter. The school connection, if you're trying to reduce the student's time spent on a sport, keep the school sport and jettison the club one. Unless the student's mental health and ability and friendships are everything with the club, then forget the school one and stick with the club. you've got students, all this athletic work is very helpful for students, right? It keeps them busy. It keeps them like the dopamine and the positivity and everything. Exercise is really important for students in high school. And if they're part of an athletic team, it's probably doing a lot of help with the regulating of their schedules, their regulating of themselves. So keeps them busy. I'm a big fan of being involved in that type of pursuit. If 10th grade things are starting to look up for your student athlete, that they are moving up to the higher level of whatever they're doing, or their objective criteria is starting to, get better and better, either a lower score or a higher score based on whatever sport that is, then I would continue to do that. And I would be then at that point looking to see about being a recruited athlete as the student is entering summer after 10th grade into 11th. And then, see how it goes at that point. But definitely be starting to look into like a true recruitment process at that point. If a student is not recruited as an athlete, does long-term involvement in sports still strengthen a college application? I think I answered that absolutely. How should students balance academics and athletics? Will weaker grades hurt their chances of being recruited? So that's a good question. So what we see at the very selective level is that these students are like bionic human beings, right? We see them doing exceptionally well in their sport and in their school academics. So if your student is really wanting to be a recruited athlete, they do sort of naturally prioritize and manage things where they are doing their sport and they're doing their academics. So I would say the personal, if there's a struggle with time management, the academic should always be first, right? If the recruitment process, the student gets injured, right, and doesn't get recruited, something happens, they don't want to play that sport anymore, you have to be sure that the academic focus is first and foremost, because we just don't know. It's not a sure thing. We don't know what will happen. So priority order is academics first, then athletics if it's a recruited athlete, and then you can see what we can make happen on sort of odd times or squeeze in other things on the personal rubric to strengthen their profile. But those things are often kind of semi-related to their sport, maybe. Like, that's kind of what we deal with in counseling. It's like, what's the smartest way we can get this student to have an interesting profile and be more than just an academic and an athlete? Is there another facet that we can bring out in their life? And do it really efficiently. That's the key, like really strategically and really efficiently to give them the strongest profile that they can have. Another question is, if a student is not nationally ranked athlete, can sports still help them stand out in college admissions? Absolutely. So again, if your student is nationally ranked as an athlete, depending on the sport, there is a chance they could be recruited to a D1 school. And that's a big decision. That's sort of like, it's a big family decision. It's a lot of resources and time and energy to be recruited to a D1. And by the way, the collegiate experience is very different for a D1 athlete, especially for a sport that's kind of performing at the highest levels. So D1 athletes are, I would say, 60% athletes at a minimum and 40% students these days. So they are fully engaged with their sport in college to often the detriment of their academic experience. That's D1, and not all D1, by the way. And then you've got D3, as I mentioned, the NESCAC, the Ivy, all of the D3 leagues and conferences are working really hard to make sure that the students are more student than athlete, but there's that there's balance. So for example, the NESCAC only allows like a 1 week preseason to a sport. So you can't show up 3 or 4 weeks in advance and just work on your sport until school starts. You can do that if you're a D1 athlete. Then they're also like, regulating. So for example, at Williams, they really worked hard to have the students only have games on the weekends. So they actually were playing back-to-back games Saturday and Sunday, but that meant that the students were on campus and able to attend class by and large for the entirety of the season. They rarely missed class. Compare that to a D1 sport, Duke. I don't even know when those basketball players go to class. Like they don't even have the same undergraduate experience anymore that any of the non-athletic students have. So this is a big decision if you even have the opportunity to go D1 of what that athletic experience is like, what the academic experience is like what are you looking for, and definitely be investigating those things is really important. Um, but if they're not nationally ranked, absolutely that they can stand out in the recruitment process if they make the cut, if they make the criteria and they can build a relationship with the coach. Absolutely. Remember, right, what did the first slide said? They're like 500,000 athletes, um, which means not everybody's a D1 athlete. And a lot of sports are looking to fill, it's like they're really looking for athletes to join them, to join their teams so that they can field all these teams. So it's not always a case of being recruited and I will share also girls are often it's a little easier for girls to be recruited than boys because in the US boys play sports at a higher rate and go through this process at a higher rate. So girls are recruited are sort of easier to get recruited because there just aren't as many of them playing sports relative to boys, and especially in some sports. And the last question on this slide is which sport tend to offer more opportunities for college recruitment? Well, as I mentioned, girls sports offer more opportunities for college recruitment in many ways. But I would say that, you can know kind of what's out there. The most popular sports right now, I would say boys soccer is really incredibly popular. And I don't really recommend the strategy of trying to identify a sport and tailoring your student to play that sport in order to get recruited. So that's what the giant scandal was about college recruitment, that where everybody went to jail was rowing at USC. And so the fix was in where, there was this broker person trying to get students to be put on the list of the rowing coach at USC to then be recruited and to get into the school despite not having the academics to be admitted. And so I don't really recommend a family take the approach of let's find a sport where they're really looking for a certain type of student and try and gear ourselves toward that or get our child to do that. But rowing seems squash. There's some kind of oddball sports at some of these schools where that fewer people are playing because they're just not as available. So you see, for example, squash. If I don't know if everybody knows what squash is, it's like racquetball in an enclosed white paneled room where it's a paddle sport. And so only some private high schools can offer squash. No public schools have squash. And so the pool of people who can actually play squash and be recruited to play that sport is very small. And so that would be a sport where you'd have a leg up being recruited if you're really good at it. But you'd have to probably send your kid to private school in order to do that. So again, I would let my students' interest in a sport and ability shine and then follow that forward through this process to see if it results in this recruitment.
So your last page is thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Waiting for you 18th page. All right. Thank you very much. I see a lot of question in the chat box. Let me share my last page. Hold on one second. Okay. I just wanted to do this last page and quickly and go to the question. So you can tell N is full of knowledge on the athletic side. Does not mean I want to emphasize because sometimes the parents asking us a very narrow question. They said, oh, if this coach, are they familiar doing STEM student? Or are they familiar with doing the humanity student? I have to tell you, coach like Ann, consultant like Ann, pretty much on our team, they are good of doing all different kind of student. Maybe Ann, maybe you can mention a couple like the mixed student you are coaching and helping with in the past. Just couple like perspective.
Yeah, it's funny that's the case. So my process for working with recruited athletes is to let the athlete, I never want a student to rely on recruitment to be admitted to a college. So we're basically running two scenarios at the same time. We're running the college recruitment process, and we're also running a traditional college counseling process. And that college counseling that I do is for students of all subject areas and interests, right? So I can have a student super interested in art or in neurobiology. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we make it work across I work with students across all subject areas. That's the same thing for a student athlete. If the student athlete is interested in a particular subject or interest or career, that's fine because most of the schools that would also be recruiting that student would align with that. So I just had a student last year who was kind of a businessy, sciency person. And we were able to get him recruited to Stevens Institute of Technology. Again, in his profile, in that rating system I mentioned, he was really borderline. If he had not been recruited, I think he would be unlikely have been admitted at Stevens. But the recruitment process and the coaches putting him on the list bumped him up. So he's kind of going to be doing my guess is a hybrid technology business degree at Stevens. And so that really lined up with him. He was really excited about that once he visited the school and met the athletes and the coach and all that stuff. But certainly my students are across all subject areas, whether I'm working with them to help them get recruited or just working as a traditional college counselor, um, you know, throughout this process.
Right, right. So we want to emphasize is when you're looking for a consultant, yes, you know, like Anne, have a spike. That spike is just happen to be herself, her family, her kids, and also some of the student, maybe because knowing Anne has those kind of pool of knowledge. So coming to her to looking for additional service and providing that spike, just like what she helping the student to build up that spike is on the sports recruitment. Does not mean she doesn't have the ability only helping the athletic recruiting. She has the capability of doing all fields, humanity, STEM, computer science, physics, all different kind of field because the method, the the method is the same. The principle is the same, to help your student to develop into whatever the strength they have and then amplify that strength and building up the evidence activity to show the other side. I'm capable. I'm curiosity person, but I'm capable of doing things to tell you I have a real experience of exploring that field. So in the future, as a parent, don't worry about looking for a consultant only good on something, but generally speaking, they cross board. But every single consultant may have a little bit more strength add on, and which is also good because otherwise this is a very competitive field. If a consultant doesn't have a spike, sometimes it's very hard for a agency like us to positioning her, because if the sports come in, we will say, oh, you need to go to Ann or you need to go to, Dawn. And those couple consultants are even at another layer of strength on the general consulting field. Okay, so I want to make sure have this page on is if you heard a lot of knowledge and you can identify and know what she's doing. So a lot of parents also asking us, I don't know how to choose a consultant. I hear three of them, I hear 10 of them. I still don't know which one, what I should be working with. You need to use your judgment. You need to use your social judgment experience to make a decision is because you can tell and know what she's talking about. If that person's knowledgeable, if the person have the experience, then you should be trusting that person is able to help your child to become somebody a little bit more competitive and put their material together to show on the other side of the mission process to show them, my student, what did I do in the high school period time. So if you like what you see, and if you think N will be add that value to your student process, helping them in high school period to do a better job to accumulating that story, accumulating that material, you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side. We are offering 30 minutes free mini consultation. You will have opportunity to asking even personalized question during that session to further evaluating if and will be the person suitable for your child go through that high school journey. Scan the barcode on the right-hand side, and then IvyCompass team, me or Allison, somebody will follow up with you to ask them the questions to introduce Anne's price, service structure, timing, everything. And if you think still are good, then we can schedule that meeting to connecting with Anne. If you're not ready, just watching, wanted to see what's going on, to follow up IvyCompass, to continue listening to the knowledge and gaining knowledge, then you can scan the barcode on the left-hand side to get into our WeChat. That's only for IvyCompass like athlete college application group. Then you can continue, following us with the information. Okay, now we can go to the questions. And also, if you wanted to open mic, you can raise your hand. Then I will be open up your microphone that you can speak to and asking for a specific question if you think your question will be easier communicating orally, not just about question in the in the chat box. Okay, I'm going to go through one or two questions, then I go to Fred. Okay, Fred, thank you for raising your hand. I'll be come to you very quickly. Let me just go through some of the questions, see if I can have Anne answer one or two to thank some of the parents put their question throughout the communication presentation. Okay, so the first question comes from Tiffany. So for Ivy School, only the team AI is important, not the individual academic scores.
So, no, the individual student athlete scores are important. So the student has to make the index, so they have to reach a criteria, and then together there may be some latitude as a group of recruited athletes. So the incoming freshman class of whatever the sport, together they all have to make this index. So if the student, for example, has a great SAT score, that's wonderful. If their GPA is maybe a little less than a traditional non-recruited athlete, then that can be worked out in the academic index. So, especially if you're thinking about an Ivy League school or the NESCAC, I mean, the student can't be off by very much. They have to really be a stellar academic student, as well as a student athlete, as really good in their sport. So just know that there's some funny stuff that goes on when the coach is putting the group together. For example, the basketball player I used, that he knew he was never not going to really get any playing time, but they recruited him for his scores and to help the index. Then we had the student who was asked to take the SAT 5 times. Her score, probably after this time number 2, was okay for her to be admitted, but she was just trying to rack up extra points on her SAT in order to make the index stronger so that everybody could be admitted.
Okay, thank you very much. Another parent's asking, is the size of high school matters?
No, not to be a recruited athlete. This is where students who depending on where you live, can affect this process. So, for example, if you live in a place where there aren't club opportunities for your students' sport, and the school itself doesn't have a team or the team doesn't do well, that can be a struggle. So, the coach, so it doesn't mean you can't continue to try this. But for the subjective sports and for, say, a school with not a great program in a particular sport or you don't have access to club, the self-recruiting process will be really important. And what that involves is you going to that university for an ID clinic so that the coach can watch you perform with their very own eyes. So, for example, in summer after ninth grade, summer after 10th grade, there are colleges that come together to offer a summer camp environment of like play your sport, and all of these coaches stand around and watch, and their assistant coaches run the drills, and some of their players are hired to run the drills. So they can actually see your student athlete in these subjective sports actually be on the field or be in the pool, whatever it ends up being, and they can see them for themselves. And then you would continue to do that summer after 10th grade and then start to go to ID clinics that are more for 11th graders, for real true like potential recruits. So you can, again, self-recruit by actually looking for opportunities at a given school and going and attending those. There's just time and money involved in that, and it's not always fruitful, but it's definitely worth a try if you find yourself without access to as much quality athletic programming.
Okay, next question is kind of interesting. Maybe if we cannot answer that, maybe you can give them a way to get that. The question was asking by Sean, what golf average score can get qualified for D1 and D3? A top national ranking is a must-have or state level also okay?
So, I want to say that the average of like 3 rounds for the student that I'm working with is like a 72 right now. So that's a pretty just straight number. But I would say you'd have to be better than that. And that's a D3, probably a pretty solid D3 golfer right now. Um, and so the golf score is important. The ranking can help. And the ranking would be more like how like consistent is this student playing at this high level? So, no, you don't need all of these things. You need to accumulate a really good golf score and consistently have it and show that consistency across multiple, right? So by the way, when you play golf, you play year round and you play like the full season is often the whole school year of a college year. So the consistency of play matters to a coach, and you want to be showing you didn't just get that score once, you're consistently getting that score tournament after tournament or in that range.
Okay. I'm going to answer one question. Then Fred, I already unmute you. So next it will be yours. Let me asking from Emma. Where do we put sports accomplishment under honors? If it's not, where to list them? I think
Yeah,
that's a
so
good question.
sports almost always goes under your activities. So there in the Common App there are 10 activities. And if you're, the point where you're a recruited athlete or this is your top commitment, then it would probably be your number one commitment. And then we'd be having conversations if I'm the consultant to say like, okay, how, if there's 10 sports things, 10 of your one sport, we're not going to put all 10 of those in those spots. We want to show your profile being like you're a community member, you have other things going on besides this sport, but they would appear in your honors. So, for example, soccer, if you play both school and club or for any of these sports, those would definitely be 2 entries in your honors. I mean, sorry, in your activities.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's it.
Honors are academic focused, so sports don't really belong in the honors section.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Fred, you can unmute yourself. You can ask. Next is Tiffany.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. Uh, in some college athletic teams, assistant coaches are part-time staff who usually have their own private local clubs or their local teams. How do we deal with the conflict of interest if they favor their own students or those students who are not their students but who attend their camps, their expensive camps?
That's a great question, and it's a really tricky situation. I've personally had that situation with my daughter. Um, you know, what I think you do as a parent is within a reasonable level of this. There is, especially when everything has moved to club. So, the assistant coach of the local university is the head of the women's program at the club in your town. What do you do? And so I've seen people solve this problem by kind of trying to do it all and pay a little bit of homage to that coach, in order not necessarily put all your eggs in that basket, but show up at that program here and there if that's possible to do, once a month or whatever, so that you're kind of playing the game. Unfortunately, this happens, right? Because there's money involved in this. We want our coaches to be good people who are rating students on their abilities. But the fact is that we're human and all of this kind of garbage happens in all of these sports. So you see conflicts with parents and coaches. You see favored athletes. You see parents who have the ability and time and money sending their athlete to the assistant coaches clubs in order to win favor. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The one thing I will share, so when my daughter was recruited at Williams, she went on a recruitment trip. I went with her. And we sat in the auditorium with the coach. And I leaned over to my daughter and I said, ask if your club coach's opinion of you as a player has any influence on the Williams coach's decision to recruit you. And my daughter raised her hand and she asked that question, and the coach said, absolutely not. That coach's opinion of you as a player has no influence on my decision to recruit you. I, with my eyes, see you play, and that's what I care about. It's only my opinion of your play that matters in the recruitment process. So that's why self-recruiting, when it comes especially to D3, matters so much. The investment you should be making with your child is, as they approach 11th grade, identifying 5 schools that are goal schools and getting that player to play for those coaches at summer camps and ID clinics or whatever the sport is offering, to get that coach's eyes on your student athlete. And that will matter. And that they keep playing with this awful assistant coach or whatever. But that's what you want to do. And maybe you're not going to be able to, have this local school be on your list. Or maybe it will be, The turnover of these coaches is really high. So that guy may be gone next year and not be a problem in your life. I mean, they move around maybe 2 years max for many of them.
Thank you. Okay, next is Tiffany.
Thank you for sharing, Anne. And
Sure.
my question is that you mentioned about the parade. So that's occurred in the summer before the senior year, right?
The pre-read, yes.
Yes, the parade. And then is that a very serious, decision made by the D1 coach that they are really wanted to consider you? And if you pass the parade, and then is that very likely that your student athlete will be recruited? And even you have oral commissions, and what is the chance to get decommitted, and how to hold your position after you got your oral commission.
Right.
And the second, I'm sorry, it's just a follow-up question, is that I think if your student athlete has an agent, professional agent, and then it's just pushing you to the pipeline, and then how to balance between the agent or the college counselor. So the student athlete should talk more about, your situation with your agent, or more about, the college counselor. So what is the role played in this recruiting process, between the agent and the counselor?
So let's start with the first part of your question. So when we talk about a pre-read and this timeline that I laid out, I'm talking about mostly D3 recruitment, where a student athlete is self-recruiting, getting in touch with coaches, going to the clinics, doing all this kind of stuff to get them in front of the coach. And then the coach, in sort of a more D3 traditional system, that pre-read is very important. And so it's pretty official in the sense that the coach has a list, is taking it to the admissions officer in charge of all the athletes, and running these profiles by that admissions officer. They are going through all of this material very seriously. They've got their own internal assessment that they're doing. That school may have its own index, the conference might have its own index, and they're looking at all of this. Now, the seriousness of it is accurate. The actual commitment of a D3 is variable based on the coach. So if the coach, and I think for most D3 schools, the coaches are pretty straightforward. If they say they want you and are putting your name forward and are making this commitment to you via email, on the phone, whatever, they're serious. They win no points by screwing up their kids and changing their minds and reshuffling things. It's especially steady for sports, women's sports, where there aren't as many in the pipeline. I have seen only a handful of occasions, basically 2, where a D3 coach made a commitment to a student, but it wasn't even that strong of a commitment. They were honest. They were like, well, you're on the border here, whatever. And then, of course, as you can imagine, something happened at another school that kicked a kid out who came down to this kid's school, who then kicked him off the list. So that was a real problem and a disruption. And I think it's something that the coach did not want to have happen, but didn't really have a choice. And we knew from inside information that this kind of chain of events happened, and it continued and continued down the line. So almost always these D3 coaches are making commitments that are genuine and true and should be reliable. When I counsel recruits, student athletes, I also counsel them to be honest with these coaches, to say, you are my top pick, you are my favorite school, I want to attend this school. And if not, then to come up with other words, because you want to be honest with them so that they're honest back with you. And that has by and large worked very well with the students that I've counseled. Moving to the question about an agent, that's D1 recruitment. So a student in D3 would not have the same situation with NIL as they do in a D1 situation. So I happen to know the lawyer at Rutgers who's in charge of all of the recruitment. That wasn't even his job a couple years ago, but now it is because of NIL. And so he will be on a phone call with a student athlete, a recruited athlete, a parent, a lawyer, the student athlete's lawyer and their agent, and sometimes their PR person, in order to close the deal on the NIL contract for that student to attend Rutgers. So if a college counselor is involved in that, then the counselor would be doing my role, of the counseling, of the making sure that the college application is in good shape. But I'll be honest, depending on the level of the athlete, if they're truly elite D1, I don't even, they have to submit an application, but I don't even know if it would matter if it were incomplete or not. This is a totally different ball game. And these folks are like being hired to go to the college now instead of applying to it. So I have not had an NIL agreement client, student that I've worked with. So, that would be new to me.
Okay. Thank you. This is a very detailed answer. Okay, let me go back to chat box for a little bit, okay, to respect some of the parents are listing their question during the presentation. Then I come back to you for Cindy. Okay, Cindy, you're next. Okay. Um, does question from Joy, does track and field needs to join club outside of school? Track and field.
I would say that the better track athletes are running club because often, if you know that your high school track coach is excellent, then great. They can stay in high school, they're achieving great times, the student's really motivated, things are going well. But almost always for athletes that are moving toward wanting to play their sport, participate in their sport in college, they want more. And the club the club scene for track and field, depending on where you live, can be very beneficial in the sense that the coach is going to coach the running better than the high school coach will. So that can have an impact on times in a big way and make a big difference. I had a student who was not a great student. He's a great runner. He worked with a club coach who I happen to know through my husband and my daughter and the whole thing. And once he moved over to this club, his times dropped pretty considerably. I mean, this club coach was excellent. And he coached a girl to run at Georgetown. He's been exceptional. And it made a big difference for the student to run club. He continued to run for his high school too. Then he's my Northeastern kid, who then is now one of the top runners at Northeastern. He's been setting school records. And I think the club coach is still involved in his track and field career.
Okay. Next question. I think maybe this is a coach or something. The question coming from TJ saying, my runner has ADHD and anxiety and wants to be focused on academic. What if the club coach give a better advice for my track athlete than the school coach?
Yeah.
Should my athlete stick with the club rather than school team?
Yes, I think that that would be okay as long as the club is offering a set of race opportunities that's similar to high school, right? So what in New Jersey in track and field, you race for your school and you go once you get into the championship zone of the season, you race after race and the field gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you're finally at what's called the meet of champions. And that's every student who's the best at their race across the full state running, right? So you need to make sure that the club has enough meets, official meets, timed meets, opportunities for your student to run in the events that are offered at the high school level or at the college level so that the coach of the college team can do a like comparison of your athlete compared to all the other athletes they're recruiting. But if this is a better situation for your student, this is, by the way, very similar to my Northeastern student. He had all of the same things going on. And he was able to navigate both high school and club. But definitely, I mean, if you can say that he'll have enough criteria to be measured by the time recruitment comes around through the club team, then yes, he can play for club and not high school. Run for a club and not high school.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne.
Sure.
So now, Cindy, I open your mic so you can speak now. Cindy Han.
Thank you so much. Hi, just a couple of quick questions. One is it common for these three coaches to ghost you after they reach out to you? Because I my daughter plays on a national level for a sport, and a couple of coaches reached out to her in December last year. And then they said that they wanted to establish a phone conversation, but then they didn't follow up. Is it up to us to go back and follow up with them? Because we asked them about the time, right? And then they just ghosted us. So I don't know what happened because she's a 10th grade. So I don't know whether the coach was busy doing something else, or they just forgot about us, or they think we're not good enough. I don't know. So that's my first question. And then the second quick question is, how does financial aid play a role for D3? Like, when would you know, and for how much, and things like that? Yeah.
So, for the ghosting, yes, it does happen. But again, just keep thinking of the term self-recruit, because you should be actively engaging with these coaches. Some may ghost you and there's no getting that back, it won't ever happen. But following up politely, if you can imagine these coaches, right, especially the assistant coaches that are doing all this, they're just like on their phones all day texting kids, trying to be like on top of it and blah, blah, blah. So it wouldn't be surprising if some of that fell through. The other thing, which I should know this information, but frankly, I would be looking it up, is there are some rules about age and whether a coach can initiate a conversation with the student and vice versa. So that also maybe if your student's in 10th grade, frankly, I don't know. I need to know the sport, and we'd have to look it up to be like, when can these conversations begin? It used to be much more strict. It might not be now. And so that may be playing a role, but if it was December, it's only March now. So I would definitely be following up with those coaches, consistently be in touch and try and see if you can rework that relationship and if they'll reply now, especially if you have something related to the student athlete's performance that's been an improvement or a new win or something to update them on, to be back in touch. I would just pretend like that ghosting never happened, and be like, hey, this cool thing happened with my child, and or your child should be the one texting and saying, letting you know. The second question, remind me, was
financial aid.
Financial aid. Okay. So for D3 especially, your ideal situation is that your athlete gets pre-read in June, and that the agreement over the summer you come to is that you'll be the selection has been narrowed, and your child is now ready to commit to one school. And that's an ED decision, so that the coach says, will you apply ED to our school? And your student athlete says yes. You can only pick one school to apply ED to. And this addresses a couple questions in the chat. But that doesn't mean you should just stop with that one school. So one, if you come to the agreement with the coach that you're going to apply ED, then that's the choice. That's the one school that you're going to do that to, and you've made the commitment to that school. If financial aid is an issue for you as a family, my recommendation is to have a conversation with the financial aid folks in advance of this ED application. So you call them up, you go visit them, you say, I want to talk to the financial aid person who's in charge of all the athletes. That's a thing. And then you would go meet with that one person who's the financial aid person in charge of the athletes, and you'd have a conversation, and you could say, can we see what our financial aid package would be? If this all goes well, we need to be sure it's within this range in order for us to pursue this. Because once you apply ED and you get an aid package, that's the package that you get. And you can negotiate it the following year, or you can negotiate it only if your family has had a massive change in circumstances and you can no longer afford to send your child to that school at that level of aid. The recruitment process will not affect financial aid, but you'll just be slightly more organized and be able to have this conversation in a way that's like, my student's on the list and really wants to attend here, and the coach invited ED, and super great athlete. And so can we figure this out? And they'll do their best to help you, but you do lose the opportunity to like compare aid packages and that type of thing.
For D3 schools, would you be able to do that?
Only if you didn't apply ED.
Yeah. So if you don't apply ED, is that going to be like an insult or project some negative?
Yeah, I mean, there could be negativity to that, which is why you want to sort it out in advance of applying. So you're a recruited athlete. You're on the coach's list. You call up financial aid and you say, let's have a conversation about this. Can you show me what this package would look like before my child decides to go ED here? Because we need to know. That's a very legitimate question. That's what they're there for. They're supposed to help you with that. And they will, for sure. But at the same time, you're not only just applying to that one school. Even if you commit to an ED, you can still be applying to some EA schools just in case the bottom falls out and there's some other issue. You just can't apply to other schools' ED.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a couple more people raise hands, so we're getting close to a close time. Maybe I squeeze in one question from the chat box from Jason. Which level of soccer club is considered as a good level for college recruiting?
So if your athlete is a boy soccer player, the student should really be aiming for an MLS Next program. So that is the top level right now for club soccer. If you live in an area where that's not available or it's too expensive or whatever, then you want to be playing, you can look it up and it changes so often. So ECNL is one very top level. You travel around and play really top teams. And so if you're in a club and they have an ECNL program and your student athletes playing at that level, that's really good. But they're really in the hunt if they're in an MLS Next program.
Okay, one more person I think can speak is Tammy. Tammy, now you can open your mic to ask a question. You'll be the last one. Tammy, are you there? If you're not, I move to the next person. Okay, if Tammy is not talking, then let's do TJL last.
All right. Thank you so much, Sophia. This is amazing. And thank you for all your insights. This is the best athletic recruitment, basically webinar I've ever attended. Amazing.
Oh,
thank you. So just a quick question. In my case, my daughter wants to get really good at one event. Do you think it's better, let's say, so she runs both cross country and long distance track. Is it better for her to focus on one event, let's say 5K, run it throughout the year, rather than splitting it like traditionally fall, running 5K for cross country and then in the spring runs 1600 or whatever. She wants to get really good at something, but at the same time, some people say that coaches want to recruit athletes that can run multiple events. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would say not to focus on a single event in high school. I think running the cross country season is great. And then running the longer distances in winter and spring track is great. I agree with what you've heard where coaches often just see athletes and they see body shape, they see time, right? But they also, especially in track and field, they can see, athletes that might do the decathlon or the heptathlon or, they're much more kind of like putting the team together and looking for, they might take a distance runner like your daughter and actually have her do shorter distances once she gets to college, or try her out at shorter distances. So the idea that she would focus on a particular event, be recruited for that event, and show up in college and run that event is not likely. Okay. It might happen, but I think, if she can compete in events at times, and they can be multiple events or one event, it doesn't really matter, that are at the college level, then she's in good shape to be recruited.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it's that time, although we still have 85 people waiting to listen, ask questions. I very much apologize and feel bad of not able to answer all the questions in the chat box because it's a complicated. Every question require a lot of information. It's not as
Yeah,
simple as
we could be talking all night long about this topic.
yeah. Maybe we can invite you back,
Yeah,
sometime
sure.
in the future to do more of, I do see content have a lot of information I don't even know. So I learned so much as well. I wish I can have it multiple times. Anyway, so thank you very much, Anne, for your time, and thank you for all the audience. 82 family parents have wonderful, talented kids in this athletic field. Congratulating to you. I know it's not an easy process. That's why you need a professional hand holding. So you can scan the barcode on the right hand side to have that opportunity to talk with Anne. Then you have 30 minutes to asking questions about your particular situation with your child. And we're hoping, best luck for your child to go into their dream school. So I apologize, not able to go through all the questions you list in chat box. And thank you for participating in and list those questions and have that opportunity to learning things with us. So thank you again, Anne, for your time. I know it's late for you. And thank you, Allison, for the technical background supporting. Thank you all for the participation with us, and looking forward to see you next time. We're going to continue bring up those top-notch consultant to share the knowledge with you and hopefully give you that choice to choose the right one for your wonderful child. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
See you next time. Thank you, Anne. Okay, stop recording, Allison, Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. See you next time.
You are the host, so I can directly turn off the Zoom.
Got it.
Okay.
So I don't see where to stop the recording. Oh, pause here. Got it. All right, so just leave this for like a minute. Anyone, if you are interested to go into WeChat, scan the barcode on the left-hand side. Otherwise, scan the barcode on the right-hand side. Somebody will talk to you about Anne's service and also his, her price. And hopefully you will find the professional advice. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.